Welcome to the Diversity Report podcasts, where we interview the movers and shakers and innovators who are shaping our future. I'm your host, Deborah Levine, editor of the American Diversity Report. And with me today is Alison Gerber, the editor of the Chattanooga Times Free Press. She manages a newsroom of 75 people that produces a daily newspaper, 3 magazines, 5 weekly community newspapers, and multiple special sections. The Times Free Press has been recognized with awards that include the Tennessee Press Association's top honor for the past 3 years. The paper also has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 3 of the last 5 years. Alison serves on the boards of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government and the Associated Press Media Editors. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you, Deborah. It's great to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have a chance to speak with you and hear about your work. And let's start with hearing how you came involved in the newspaper industry and then in the Chattanooga Times Free Press.
Okay. I actually became a journalist. My first job in journalism was as a designer, as a page designer. I had a background, a liberal arts background, and I had studied art, and I saw an opening at a small paper in Florida. I was living in Florida after college, and I'd been backpacking through Asia and just kind of doing things that you can do after college that you might not have time to do, further down the road in life. So I came back and didn't really know what I wanted to do, and there was an opening at the small paper for someone to design pages, and I thought, I could do that. And so I went there, and it was really very casual. I literally just walked in the newsroom and asked them if they would consider hiring me for the job, and ultimately they did. And so I designed pages, and I learned how to do that. But once I was in the newsroom environment, I realized that pretty quickly that I would probably love being a reporter. So I didn't spend very long as a designer, and I moved over to being a reporter fairly quickly. And this was a very small paper, so it was one of those papers where there was a tiny staff, so you got to do everything. I mean, there were days when I would write the story, I would take the photograph, and then I would lay the page out with my story and my photograph. And then that in larger newsrooms, the division of labor is different, but in a small newsroom, you get to do everything and you get to learn everything. And so that was great. And then I moved on to bigger newspapers. I worked at the Naples Daily News in Florida, and I worked at the Fort Myers News Press. But my husband, who I met when I was living in Florida, is from this part of the world. He actually grew up in North Georgia, fairly close to Chattanooga. And my family's kind of spread out across the country, and his family was all kind of clustered here. And his mom became ill. She had a terminal illness. So we decided to move up here. And I told him that I would agree to come for 3 to 5 years. And that was 14 years ago. So I'm still here.
I know that one.
Yeah, it's a great part of the world. And I ended up working at the Times Free Press. And I have worked here for the past 14 years and have seen a lot of change in the newspaper industry during that time. So it's been a really interesting, it's interesting times to be in the newspaper business.
Yes, it is, and especially those that are community-based. You have your ear to the ground, as it were. Tell us a little bit about the value of this kind of newspaper.
Well, I mean, I think that community newspapers are important, but for the very simple and obvious reason that we inform people about what's going on in their community. And unfortunately, in this day and age, there are fewer community papers, or there are papers doing less work in various communities. I mean, the Times Free Press, our core community is Hamilton County, and then we have some outlying counties like Bradley and Catoosa, Walker County, Dade County. We have some Marion. We have sort of a core of counties that border Hamilton or are close to Hamilton, where sort of the most of our coverage comes out of Hamilton, and most of our readers. And then we have these other counties as well, where we have pretty good readership. But we actually all together circulate in about 18 different counties. But some of the counties we don't really cover as much unless there's something really big happening. When I first came to work here, we circulated further south into Georgia, and we sort of actually overlapped with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And we circulated far out enough in Tennessee that we would meet up with the circulation areas of the Tennessean and the Knoxville News Sentinel. And now with, cuts and changes in the newspaper industry, most newspapers have pulled back somewhat. So there are areas of our circulation that aren't regularly covered by a daily paper because, we still go as far as Mont Eagle, but I don't think the Tennessean does anymore. And so there are, there's a term called news deserts. There are news deserts sort of occurring across the country, mostly in rural areas that were at one time covered by a metro daily paper that no longer are. And so I think that I think that's a really unfortunate set of circumstances, because I do think that newspapers have a watchdog role in society. And not only do newspapers inform people about who's playing at Riverbend tonight and who's what's happening in terms of entertainment and community events, but we also inform people about the state of the schools and whether local lawmakers are considering a tax increase and all of these things that impact people's daily lives, which roads are going to be widened, how long the road project will take. And I think that type of information is vital to people in a community, but I also think that the other side of what a newspaper does, sort of the watchdog journalism, is also vital to society. It's important that we cover elected officials and their actions, and that we provide information on how they are doing their jobs to the community. And so I think that that type of information is essential, and it hasn't, the thirst for it has not gone away. How it's delivered and the manner in which it's covered has changed dramatically over the years.
One of the more fascinating aspects of the Times Free Press is your dual editorial pages showing both sides of an argument. Share with us how that came to be and what it looks like.
Yeah, sure. So most people who've lived in Chattanooga for a while know that before there was a Times Free Press, 17 years ago, there was when the Times Free Press was formed. Before that, there was the Chattanooga Times, which was a more liberal-leaning newspaper. It was run by the family that runs the New York Times. And everybody knows the famous story of Adolph Ochs buying the paper for just a few $100s and making it profitable within a year, and then taking that money to New York and buying what at the time was a failing paper called the New York Times. And slowly he and his descendants built it into the powerhouse newspaper it is today. And then on the Free Press side, the Free Press was more conservative leaning. Lee Anderson was the late Lee Anderson was the editor of the Free Press. He was really known for his conservative editorials. He was a conservative at a time when when the Democrats had a much stronger hold on the South than Republicans, and Lee was sort of a lone voice in the wilderness. I mean, that changed over the course of his lifetime, but when he was younger, he was holding true to his conservative principles, and the paper was really known for that. So when Walter E. Hussman Jr., a fourth-generation newspaperman out of Little Rock, he purchased both papers 17 years ago, and he made a commitment to the community at the time that he would keep both editorial pages in order to honor the legacies of both of those newspapers, and also in order to, give readers. He knew he was combining the readers of two very different newspapers in terms of political ideology, and he wanted all of the readers of the readers of both newspapers to be satisfied with the new paper. So that was another reason he did it. As far as we know, this is the only newspaper in the country that has 2 editorial pages. Walter didn't know this 17 years ago, but in these times that we live in now, it seems like a genius decision because our country is so divided. And, giving both political views, I think now is more essential than ever. I don't know that people are as open to the other side as they once were. But I think that it's important, and I hope that people read both sides, that even if you are conservative leaning, you'll read the Times page, and even if you're liberal leaning, you'll read the Free Press page, just to kind of consider the points and arguments of, people, of Americans who have a different political philosophy.
I must admit that I do read both sides, but prefer one to the other, and I won't mention which. I'm sure it wouldn't come as a surprise to folks, but it is a true genius that you have both side by side in these divisive times, and the way that the newspaper and media industries are changing to do that. Do you have a sense that as the media and the internet changes, that what you're doing will rise up, or will it be sort of covered up by what's happening online?
Well, first of all, just to follow up on your comments about the 2 editorial pages, I will say that it is becoming it's becoming more difficult. Like, even though we present both sides, it seems like within each side of the political aisle, there are different interests. For example, let's take the conservative page as an example. We try and offer columnists who show all different sides of the conservative point of view, because just because you might be a conservative, that doesn't mean you're the same as the conservative living next door to you. So, for example, we have a columnist who considers himself a libertarian, and then we have others who are more sort of mainstream Republicans, and some who are more like social conservatives. But I do think sometimes it's difficult to satisfy all points of view on one page. So just to make that point. But to your question about, the digital landscape has dramatically changed newspapers, and how, for a long time newspapers had a real monopoly on how the news was delivered, newspapers and TV stations. And things have changed dramatically for both of us, because, anyone with an internet link can create a website and produce some form of news. Anybody with a phone in their pocket can be a videographer. And so things have changed, and how people produce news and consume news has changed dramatically. We have, like most newspapers in America, we have a smaller print circulation than we used to. But we have a much larger readership than we've ever had. Even when we were at our highest print circulation number, we were never physically able to reach as many people as we can reach through the internet. So, I think that the internet is our friend in terms of disseminating information. When I started out as a reporter, pre-internet days, I would cover things like, say I covered something at 10 a.m. and there would be TV stations there covering the same event, and they would put it on the noon news, and then they'd have it on the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news, and then they'd have it in the morning news at the same time that my story was getting to people, was reaching people. So even though I was there like live while an event was happening, I wasn't able as a reporter to communicate it to people until many, many hours later because of our delivery system. Now with the internet, we can compete better with broadcast news, and we can serve our readers better in terms of like getting them information instantaneously. So, the internet has hurt the business model for the newspaper industry, but it has certainly helped the ability of newsrooms and reporters and editors across the country to get news to readers and to fulfill that public service role of a newspaper. So I think that, I'm an optimist about the news industry. I realize that it's challenged, but I think that it's changing. How we deliver the news will change, but I don't think newspapers will go away. I do think there's still a lot of change ahead of us, and there's probably change ahead of us that we can't predict right now. Just the way 15 years ago, nobody would have imagined how the news delivery system looks now.
How do you view the situation where people are labeling things online, especially online, as fake news? Do you get involved in that argument, that discussion?
Yeah, sometimes. The interesting thing to me about fake news is that fake news has existed for a long time. I remember, years ago, standing in the supermarket line and looking at the National Enquirer covers, and it would say, Elvis is alive and living on Mars or whatever. That was fake news. Those are made up stories. Elvis is dead. But they didn't have the mechanism to reach as many people as fake news in the internet era does. And the term fake news, I think suddenly it became like very commonly and widely used right after in the late days of the presidential election last year, and right after, referring to, initially the term fake news was referring to stories that were just entirely made up. Stories that were circulated online that said, there was one about Michelle Obama was actually a man, and she had been living as a woman her whole life. And that's fake news, but it was circulated online, and some people probably believed it. But what I found in just the few short months since the election ended and the discussion on fake news really sort of bubbled up is that people have sort of co-opted that term now, so that it can mean whatever people want it to mean. If somebody doesn't like a story, even if the story is factually accurate, if they don't like it because it's maybe about a relative being arrested, or maybe it's about something that happened at their organization that isn't particularly flattering, I have found that they will then just call it fake news. The true definition of fake news is that it's news that's made up. But in my experience recently, people will just call anything they don't like fake news. And I think that's really kind of hurtful to the debate over true fake news and news literacy. News literacy is a term that sort of applies to efforts to educate consumers of news about how to discern, and consumers really not of news, but of information, on how to discern whether the information they're consuming online is accurate or not, to try and it's kind of like back in history class in college or in high school when your teacher taught you how to discern the validity of a primary source. And it's the internet version of that. There's so much news out there. You can Google something and, in some cases, millions of pages pop up. So how do you as a consumer know which ones are the reliable ones, whether it's a news story or information about an illness or just anything you might be seeking information about? And so I think that, fake news, in trying to promote news literacy efforts, having a really true understanding of fake news and just plainly made up stories is helpful. And I think it really muddies the waters when, fake news just becomes a term that's bandied about, referring to anything that people might not agree with or might not like. We see that a lot on our editorial pages. Somebody doesn't like a particular opinion of a columnist, and they'll say, well, it's fake news. Well, first of all, it's not news. It's an opinion piece. It's somebody writing their opinion on what's happening in the world or in their community. But, there's a lot of things now get labeled with a really broad brush as fake news. And I don't think at the end of the day that's helpful to our civic dialogue that we have in communities across our country.
Well, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you as we go forward in our divisive time, but it looks like you're enjoying it and you're good at it. I wonder if you could share with us what it's like to be a woman in the media, in the newspaper industry at this time.
Well, a few years ago, and I'm not sure if these numbers hold true today, but a few years ago, there was a report that said that there are more women going into journalism than men. And I thought, wow, that's great. That's that's a good development. But then I read further into the report, and it said it's because journalism is a low-paying field, and women are often not the primary breadwinners in a family, so they don't feel the pressure to necessarily enter a field that is higher paying the way men do. So I thought, okay, well, that's not such a good thing, because it sort of speaks to the traditional societal roles not really changing. And also, several years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a conference, and it was mostly editors and people in leadership roles with newspapers. And there was a really long line for the men's room, and there was no line for the women's room. And me and these two other women just kind of breezed in, and one of them said, "This is great. Usually the long lines are for the ladies' room, not the men's room." And I said to her, "No, this isn't great. There isn't a line here because there aren't enough women in leadership roles in newspapers across the country." And we ended up having this interesting discussion, like, standing in the bathroom. But I think that, newspapers have, a lot of women go into journalism, but not a lot of women end up moving through the ranks and becoming leaders, whether it's in, TV newsrooms or newspaper newsrooms. And I think that I think a lot of that is because we are, as a society, still kind of glued to our traditional roles, where women are typically even in families where two spouses both work, women typically shoulder more of the child rearing responsibilities. And journalism is a difficult career in which to balance with children and families, because it's 24/7 and it doesn't stop. And I think I've seen a lot of women get to the point where they had kids and they just kind of like bowed out of the career track of journalism. They might have remained in journalism, but decided, well, I'm gonna stay at this one particular level. And so I think that the lack of women in editing roles is really like intricately tied to traditional societal roles still being prevalent in our society.
Is there anything that can be done to change that at all?
Well, I think that it will change over time. I mean, I think we'll see it change, because roles in society are changing, maybe slowly, but certainly surely. And I hope it'll change over time. I think that you have to have a diversity of viewpoints. Women don't look at things necessarily exactly the same way as men. They don't always manage the same way men do. And so I think and when it comes to selecting news stories, I think sometimes women see things a little bit differently than men. One thing that we've talked about doing at the Times Free Press, we haven't done it, but it's probably something we should do, is doing an audit of our newspaper stories, our local stories, and looking at how many of the sources in our stories are men versus women. And, looking at how that sort of like reflects, does that accurately reflect our society? Does that accurately reflect the gender breakdown of the Chattanooga region? And I think that depending on the section, we might have different results. In the business section, for example, where they quote a lot of business leaders, many of the business leaders in Chattanooga are men. There are a lot of women, but not many of them are in the top leadership position. So, I think that if we do a better job as newspapers in general, and talking about the Times Free Press, but also the whole industry, the broader industry, I think that might encourage, more women to enter the field and stick with it.
Would you like to say a word or two about the new initiative to have women contribute to the Times Free Press?
I would love to. So me and Chris Vass, who is our public editor, were approached several months ago by Yelena Butler, and she's working on Mayor Andy Burke's Women's Council that he has dealing with women's issues. And she came with Holly Ashley, who's the executive director of the Chattanooga Women's Leadership Institute, to the newspaper to meet with us to ask if, and she pointed out that, and accurately so, but she pointed out that there are not a lot of voices of women in the business section, for the reasons that I just mentioned. And she wondered if we would be willing to work with them on finding women who have been leaders in this community and who have, worked in the business field and the nonprofit sector and in, various parts of our community, and have them write about, for the business section, about issues that have to do with, not necessarily strictly business focused, but issues that might have to do with women in, in careers, and how women sort of prepare themselves and, roles in society and in business. And she and Chris and I loved the idea. And so we worked with them on how it might work. And they have assembled a roster of a really, I think, great group of women, including yourself, Deborah, as you know, and others who are going to be writing. They're going to we'll rotate columnists through. Yelena's column ran recently. It ran last week, and it was the first column in the series. She kind of introduced it and kicked it off. And we have a great number, or a good group of women who have great ideas for column ideas that I think women will relate to, but they will be topics that hopefully men want to read about as well. So I'm very excited about that. I think it's a great development, and we're very thankful to Yelena and Holly for approaching us and for their leadership on this initiative.
That is a great initiative. I'm delighted to be part of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it unfolds. And I wonder if given that you have a few words of wisdom for young women who might like to write for a newspaper and go forward in their careers to be an editor like yourself.
Well, I would say that journalism is a really good field because it's for the simple reason, this might sound like I'm oversimplifying something, but it's not boring. You get to do something very different every day. You're never in the same routine. There are some jobs out there that are pretty routine, and this is not one of them. And in doing that, in working in a field where you do the same thing, where you do different things and you learn different skills, and you have to learn to deal with people. You have to learn to write well. In doing that, you really gain a skill set that can translate into so many other fields. I mean, just because you start in journalism doesn't mean you have to stay in journalism. You learn to deliver on deadline. You learn to become a multitasker, a quick study, a critical thinker. You learn to get answers to complex questions really fast. You learn the kind of intricacies of the web and digital delivery and social media. You have to deal with like ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. And if you learn to do all of that, those are skills that any employer will be looking for, not just people in newsrooms. So I think I really do think it's a great training ground it's a great field to stay in for many years, but it's also a great training ground for other things.
Wonderful.
So that's what I would tell people.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And audience, pay attention, start writing. And thank you so much. Alison, do you have any final words that you'd like to say for our audience?
Well, I want to thank you, Deborah, for inviting me to talk about these issues. They are issues I feel very passionately about. I spoke earlier about I feel like the newspaper has a role in society, and so I just want to thank you for allowing me to discuss that. I've greatly enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, a pleasure. Thank you, Alison. And thank you, audience, for tuning in and working with us to make a difference. Goodbye.